Before the show began, we were discussing In the Belly. Can you tell a little bit about your work and what you've been working on lately on the organizing front?
Yeah, In the Belly is a abolitionist publication that was formed inside of Pennsylvania's Department of Corrections and SCI Fayette by a couple of revolutionary abolitionists, and they work with some folks on the outside to get their publications. They collect writings, have it sent to like a PO box on the outside, and it gets gathered, aggregated, and republished back into the over 500, 600 subscribers currently on the inside in Turtle Island. And I'm a part of the editing team on that, where we just gather the stuff, work with the rest of our editorial team, which is majority currently incarcerated abolitionists, and helping the logistics of that comms and stuff run through. Yeah. We just
Oh,
celebrated our
that's it.
5-year anniversary, actually. So that was
Yeah,
wonderful.
this is really important work that you're doing. And I was looking over some of your earlier episodes on the Dugout, and you've said that your politics comes from what you've survived: housing instability, overdose response, loss. Was there a moment where anarchism stopped being like a concept for you and started feeling like something you were already living?
Yeah, definitely. I would say it definitely got into when I got into more formal organizing spaces like post 2020 after the rebellion. I got mainly into environmental organizing, and that to me and a bunch of other things, it really got me. I found myself with the anarchists and with that kind of community without really being able to like find the label around it. Because I feel like it's definitely been like a connecting path of something that's like more not said, more like an ethics of how we operate, or at least our ideals around how we operate, and then trying to create modes of working through problems with that sense of ethics. So it's always been the people that wanted to do something and also talk about why what we were doing wasn't working in a very like critical but also hopeful, or not even hopeful, yeah, hopeful way. And I felt like that drive for like taking action, but action that had like a material impact, was something that I've always had inside of me. And when I was able to like actually have a communal relationship with that impulse with other people around me, that was beautiful. And through naming it, I've been able to extend that arm of community, but also extend beyond what that box is.
Cedric Robinson reminds us that the Black radical transition isn't about reform, it's about rupture. When you look back at your own political break from sort of respectability politics or from the state or from spaces that called themselves radical, what helped you to sort of hold that line?
I guess my memory. I've always been obsessed with the archive and expanding like publicly accessible information. And I guess because there's so much like real life treasure there, that in any moment, like there's so many different perspectives to look back on and relate to our current. And it's in the memory of those who have fought before me, who have debated before me, who have lost and who have won before me, in those martyrs, that I find community, even when alone, to stand against something and to drive me towards something beautiful. Having like the accessible information of like past revolutionaries, but also just past people trying to solve problems that are similar to ours, and being able to
Mhm.
find a unity in that has helped me, especially.
Yeah.
Um, and then, yeah,
Yeah.
the other people,
And
especially like in respectability politics, having the other people around me that are just trying to also form that new response instead of
yeah.
one that's stagnant.
And when we think about left spaces, I feel like Black anarchism gets sort of pushed to the margins. What made you feel like for the Dugout, you had to name what you were doing for what it was on your terms?
Well, one, because we're anarchists. A firm belief of ours is voluntary association, and like our Black anarchism and our media call out, and our media like involvement in this space is to unify that, not unify, but to have a space to collect that type of thought. And because one, it is so very dispersed, and it again goes back to
Hmm.
that language and that memory aspect of, we can only know what's accessible to us and what other people can teach us. And there have been so much beautiful reproductive labor to keep the information of like self-sustaining, self-managed revolution alive, that we felt that there was a bit of a dip in it in this Black anarchist region of it. And there was also an upswing. And it's part of what has flavored my introduction into like really trying to study left and radical history over the past 5 years, even more, is always finding that anti-authoritarian trend and using, I mean, as much as we can label something, we can label it to death until we can overcome it or blend it or fusion or have things that actually serve us. I think for us, it serves as a rallying call as much as it serves as an identifier of our lineage, from Black power to being property to being anti-property. And yeah.
You've talked about organizing in white dominated unions or activist spaces in your podcast that sort of weaponize radical language but still reproduce violence. What lessons do you carry from those experiences into the kind of political work you do now and who you do it with?
I mean, we're a big, heavy believer in prefigurative politics and organizing something in the now. I think it's a Zapatista phrase of, not the organizing in the shell of the new, but trying to just create what we need now. And I think we look to models, like internationally, we do look to models that do have one things, which are like the Zapatistas, like the MST down in Brazil, like the original Soviets in the USSR, these projects of like really localized self-management that allows for larger communalism. And with that in mind, when we try to organize, to me, it's about like, where's the accountability? Like there's going to be a structure. So how do we structure it in a way that actually like abolishes really easy abuse that we see in these spaces, whether it be of power, clout, or resources? And in that,
you've talked about organizing in white dominated unions or activist spaces that weaponize radical language but still reproduce violence. What lessons did you carry from those experiences into the kind of political work you do now, and how, and who you do it with?
I think, yeah, it's that emphasis on where we put our labor and trying to build prefigurative systems now, but also like understanding what kind of organizations that are like larger or mass organizations I want to join and how. Because I have like an affinity group, like a group of 5 to 6 folks, and we have like a mutual aid network and stuff, and we support each other, and sometimes some 2 or 3 of us will join a scene or a group at a time, because it's like there are larger structures that are worth being a part of and not ceding to authoritarian ground. And I think as anti-authoritarians trying to organize in those spaces, like there are some unions, and there's like in some of the big unions are cadres inside of it that are organized to make the union more democratic or stuff like that. I feel like it still can be useful, but being able to then work for actual accountability processes, like a good distribution of power and decision making, and resource allocation, is something that I've held strong through that.
I think you and Prince have both talked about Palestine not as like a metaphor or hashtag, but something that's directly tied to the Black liberation, or something tied to Black liberation. What does meaningful solidarity look like in this current moment that we see ourselves in?
I mean, I'm biased. I'm an anarchist. I'm a decolonial activist. So, and by saying I'm an anarchist, I mean I want the no world, like the big world no state solution, where we all are democratically confederalist and we have our bottom up communities. So those are my comrades dying. Those are my comrades fighting. Those are my comrades fighting authoritarianism. And to me, that means destroying the weapons that are attacking and the tools, dismantling the tools that are being used against them. And as an American, someone inside this empire directly, spatially, there are very material ways for that to happen, from blockades to actual sabotage to organizing, even like very above ground like pressuring your city council to stop funding very specific things. No more trips to training in Israel, no more training for this. There are like the way that speaking the language that they do, which is that we all do, which is we have our resources, and those resources can be a choke point. And we've seen some of that here in the States, but I think we've also seen things that don't address the material need of those who are calling for our action. And that means like even a very material impact of the encampments was a giant seismic shift in the mentality of folks, which may not have directly stopped any weapons from going, but radicalized folks that and entrenched their internationalism to a point that led to material relationships being built, to actual plans being made. And that was beautiful. And that was like something that we could see more of.
And it's kind of weird because like so much of solidarity now happens on corporate platforms, like their tweets, reels, infographics, but those are the same sort of platforms that surveil us. And corporations, obviously like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, their algorithmic violence, and they profit off our grief. How do you navigate the contradictions of doing political work in spaces designed to sort of extract from us?
I mean, it's knowing what terrain you're on and moving tactically. And being a revolutionary in America, you have to know what it's like to be behind enemy lines constantly, and what that means for one, your operational security, and two, for the kind of tactics and that can be used to implement like a strategy. I think for us here in the States, or honestly anywhere, because this is a movement that's happening, is that like the internet is very new. It is like 30 years old. I think like Facebook drops 30 this year and stuff like that. Like ARPANET, like what was before the internet, like that's like 60 years old. So and it comes from these top-down state military infrastructure and has slowly become into the public accessibility. And we have our landed gentry, our Zuckerbergs and all that stuff. And I say like we know how to treat kings, and we have a whole history of fighting this avenue. And just because they own the digital landscape that we have now doesn't mean that it can't be democratized. That being said, I think it's one of those moments of like we need like the software engineers got to be organized, like the collectives have to come up. Like nobody organizes people better than the people doing the labor itself.
Yeah.
And I like there is that thing, but it's a very resource heavy and like legitimized resource heavy playing field, because there were alternatives to Twitter with like the Fediverse and Mastodon, which is basically the same thing that Blue Sky is trying to do, except they got Jack Dorsey right behind it now, and so it gets a little bit more legitimacy. Same with I'm like low-key a tech nerd, and like now they're trying to do Bluetooth to Bluetooth like chat stuff, which has been around in community forever. We were using that here in Columbus when we had an unhoused encampment that we were supporting, and we couldn't buy everyone's cell phone service, but we could get phones and you could have Bluetooth to Bluetooth chat so that if you're at least near the camp, you can have some sort of connectivity to those that you were living with at the time. So I think it's all about like using these tools that we have around us and finding what's accessible to us, what labor do we need to make things. And I think starting from that mentality of what do we need? Because in every war, we need engineers, and now we definitely need our software engineers, and we need to be organized in that capacity. And I think that's kind of the solutions, or part of.
That was really well said. The Zionist logic of collective guilt, like no innocence, mirrors US state violence that treats entire communities as threats. What role does Black anarchist thought play in resisting that logic while still organizing?
I think it comes from the first thing that comes to my mind is understanding Black culture, and that it's something that is formed in the tight underground community, but extracted from, mimicked, and morphed, and also absorbed beautifully by like the world and everything around us. And I think that starting on the underground, working and finding language, results, and relationships, and expanding beyond, but keeping that focus on who you're actually accountable to, is a lesson from Black culture and Black anarchists that I can find. Because even I would say like some of the most militant Black anarchists will never know their names because they were all in the BLA and like in the Black Liberation Army, and they went underground. And like while their structure was more anarchisty, not all of them were, but I think it's a helm to be said that I also think a lot of Black anarchists like a lot of anarchists, don't call themselves that because it's only useful to a certain subsect because of how pigeonholed and gatekept information and language is and the wars around identity. So I think a way to fight on that front without making yourself totally exposed is to do it in comfortable spaces and expand from there.
Afro-pessimist thinkers argue that anti-Blackness is sort of total, that Black life exists in a state of social death outside the category of the human. But you've also pointed out to the limits of that framing through your podcast. How can that sort of thinking flatten what people actually live, feel, and build? And how do you hold space for both structural clarity while still making meaning, still fighting, still imagining?
Yeah, I think the issues with some of that thinking is how it can fit into people's preconception of the world and like how cultures are formed. Because to me, I still find it true. The world is inherently anti-Black, but it's a world. And for the freedom of Blackness, that world does need to be destroyed. And to do that, you build your own world. There are still other worlds out there beyond the like hegemonic pan-European settler like imperial impulse and necessity to control those resources. And that still, to me, like any world around it will be influenced by that hegemonic impulse, but same as we influence it. And so we still have to deal with all that anti-Blackness in the new worlds that we create and the worlds that we traverse to. But I think it gets flattened when people see it as like the only world there is and there's nothing beyond it. And I think like the solution or the endpoint to Afro-pessimism, because it's not an ideology, is that it's just a framework or a narrative around how Blackness is treated, how it's always a factor. And that being said, things can be less factors or factored in different ways with different quantities, with different qualifications that I think, yeah, it gets down to the base value system of how we create things and how we think about the different worlds that we want to live in.
In episode one, I think Prince critiques how films like Judas and The Black Messiah can flatten rebellion into spectacle. What's the danger in visibility of Black radical work, and how do you stay strategic without being consumed?
Yeah. I think about that often, especially around that film, because I have to get this right. I gotta look something up.
Absolutely.
Akuru Najeri, Fred Hampton's partner at the time, she didn't want that film to come out for years, and she was a part of building that film because she eventually did it.
That's
And I think
interesting. I didn't realize that.
yeah, and she was on set, and so was Fred Hampton's son. And there were a couple points where Fred Hampton's son, Fred Hampton Jr., and Akira were like, man, we're about to walk off the set. Like, this is BS. And got some changes in there. I think the danger is that it does, I think even Frantz Fanon, my favorite part of Wretched of the Earth is just that essay on national culture. And the way that it talks about, one, how violence is depicted in media to kind of soothe or give someone an outlet for a sort of fantasy or imagery. And I think that's the danger. I also think that it's very dangerous for them to still publish it because media is such a powerful tool and it lives in people's mind. As long as we're consistent in our narrative imagery around that sort of thing, I think it's very possible to subvert the danger. Because I mean, it's kind of like the thing of like, oh, how does Andor come out on Disney? And it's like, well, there are anti-fascist writers and they get jobs. That's half of what the Red Scare was. And I think that it will, like that type of imagery will get through and some of it will be genuine. But I think our danger too is that we think that the movie is enough or the imagery is enough and don't always take like the really slow time to build in real life what's needed, because we get fixated with like historical flashpoints at some times, and it becomes like this whole discourse haven, which the archive is there to educate us, entertain us, not necessarily pacify. So yeah.